This is who we're dealing with. This is the slime ball. This is Jeffrey Jackson. You are being unreasonable, apparently, if you look at Jehovah's Witnesses, an organization that calls itself the truth, not we're trying to be the truth, not maybe the truth, not almost the truth, but the truth. He's talking to people who call themselves that and telling them, well, as long as we're trying, as long as we're doing our best, that's all that matters. Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to The Attic. In this video, I'll be sharing my thoughts on the final day of the 2025 Pure Worship Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, as you can imagine, there is a lot of material for us to get through. So without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
Imagine you're at work or school, it's lunchtime, and you notice there's a group talking about a controversial topic, maybe homosexuality, or gender identity, or politics. You hope they don't notice you, but suddenly they turn, they ask, and what do you think? If you're like me, maybe you freeze, unsure what to say. It's not that we doubt what the Bible says, it's just that these are touchy subjects. Our work or schoolmates may struggle to understand our beliefs. They may think we're weird. They could even get offended. How can we handle situations like this? Let's see Jesus' example.
Yes, Jesus. He had a lot to say on the subject of homosexuality. He had so much to discuss about gender identity. Actually, I'm not so sure he did. I actually think, if memory serves, Jesus was silent on those issues in particular. So we've just been hearing from a chap called Dennis Caparelli. He works at the Warwick headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses. He's delivering part of a symposium, Lessons from What Jesus Said, and his part is No Man Has Ascended into Heaven. And he's tackling this issue that Jehovah's Witnesses, particularly young Jehovah's Witnesses, will routinely run into, where they get challenged about their beliefs. It's going to happen all the time in school. And when you're asked the question, what do you think about homosexuality? I mean, he's describing it there as being problematic from the point of view of not necessarily what you believe, but how you express it in a way that's not going to upset or offend people. I would suggest that it's a little bit more complicated than that. A lot of the time, when you're asked about these things, it's not necessarily that you fully believe the organization's teachings about homosexuality. It's that you know you must believe them and you must repeat them whether you fully believe them or not. And because you don't fully believe them yourself, that makes it more difficult for you to try to persuade people. That's bottom line, I think, the problem that most Jehovah's Witnesses face when they are confronted with, quote-unquote, controversial topics such as homosexuality.
What can help us to talk about controversial topics like the ones we mentioned earlier, or about false beliefs like hell, Trinity, or evolution? Colossians 4:6. Let your words always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you will know how you should answer each person. What's the first thing that can help? To be kind and tactful. Our words should be gracious, seasoned with salt. Have you ever eaten a meal that lacked salt? It's not very appetizing. Of course, a meal could have similar nutritional value with or without salt. But without salt, a person could take one bite and not want to keep eating. Similarly, if our words are not gracious, our listener may not want to keep listening to the Bible message. Now, I'm sure that you don't salt a steak the same way you salt a salad. Different meals require different amounts of salt. Likewise, different topics require different amounts of graciousness. And sensitive subjects require a lot of salt, a lot of kindness and tact.
He's really leaning into that salt metaphor, isn't he? So Dennis there reminding Jehovah's Witnesses that when they encounter these controversial topics, what they need to do is be kind and gracious and tactful. I'm not sure that's always going to cut it, because bottom line, a lot of what Jehovah's Witnesses believe is actually misguided, to put it mildly, to season my words with salt. For example, Dennis has there described evolution by natural selection as a false teaching. And I want you to take note of this if you're watching this video as someone who's never been involved with Jehovah's Witnesses. You're just maybe curious about what their beliefs are or what they don't believe. Well, straight away we're learning that homosexuality is a controversial topic. So in other words, Jehovah's Witnesses do have a strong position on it. We're going to hear a little bit more about just how strongly they feel about homosexuality. And they are, just in these few words, dismissing the science of evolution as a false teaching. Now, I understand some of you who've perhaps grown up with fundamentalist views, not necessarily just Jehovah's Witnesses, but those of you who've been perhaps raised thinking that the Bible is God's inerrant word and that humanity began in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. There are lots of people, not just Jehovah's Witnesses, who have problems with evolution, and they will say, "Ah, yes, well, evolution's just a theory." I would just ask you to do a little bit of research on what the word theory means in a scientific context. And here's a spoiler: gravity is also a theory. We have the theory of gravity. No one questions whether gravity is a thing. And we have the theory of evolution. And when you actually take the time to dig into this subject and learn more about evolution and how it works and what the evidence that we have is for evolution, yes, there is evidence to support it. The more you look at what this guy Dennis is saying and realize that what he's essentially encouraging Jehovah's Witnesses to do is to manipulate people, is to put up a pretense of maybe agreeing with them, but then flip it at some point. He's encouraging Jehovah's Witnesses to be disingenuous. When he describes salt, when he describes salting your food, what he's really talking about is finding ways to persuade strangers that Jehovah's Witness beliefs are true by giving a pretense of being agreeable to what the other side might think.
So how can we add kindness and tact to our conversation? Here are some suggestions. Whenever possible, try to agree with the other person. Try to commend him sincerely. Before sharing the Bible's message, try to find common ground. Find something that you both agree on and build off that. Another way to be tactful is to avoid being argumentative. Arguing and attacking someone's belief would be like burning down a neighbour's house just because it's badly built. That neighbour would likely fight like crazy trying to defend his house and just see us as the enemy. Likewise, if we attack someone's belief, he's only likely to want to defend it even more, and he'll see us as the enemy. Instead, it's often better to simply show the person the beautiful truth. That would be like building a beautiful house, across the street from that neighbour with a badly built house and inviting him to tour the new house. If he sees how nice it is, he may just want to move in. As an example, what did Nicola do? She didn't attack her classmates' view of homosexuality. She didn't say God thinks that homosexual acts are unnatural, even though that's true. She simply said, we don't support homosexuality, but that does not mean that we hate the people. And then she used the example of smoking. Yes, kindness and tact can go a long way to reaching our listener's heart.
So this is apparently how Jehovah's Witnesses are to persuade non-Jehovah's Witnesses when it comes to such issues as homosexuality, which Dennis has just described, quote, as unnatural. That's the position that Jehovah's Witnesses take on homosexuality. It's unnatural. But what he's saying here is, don't use that word. Don't be upfront and honest about these issues. Don't be argumentative. Don't say anything that could be in any way inflammatory. Try to find common ground. Try to essentially trick the person you're speaking to into thinking that you both agree on whatever it is you're talking about. And then kind of subtly, sneakily introduce your arguments in a way that's as appealing and incremental as possible. I think that's just being disingenuous and sneaky and manipulative, personally. And I found it interesting, his metaphor about you don't burn down someone's house to demonstrate that it's poorly built. And then he says, wouldn't it be better to let your neighbor, whose house you were thinking about burning down, let your neighbor tour your house, and maybe he might just want to move in. I don't think Dennis has really thought through this metaphor. Because if the neighbor moves in, then where are you going to live? The neighbor then owns two houses, both your house, what used to be your house, and the house across the street. So, yeah, Dennis, marked down, I'm afraid. You get a solid W in your theocratic ministry school book, if you still had one, for illustrations. But yeah, just a really interesting talk that demonstrates how manipulative and sneaky Jehovah's Witnesses can be when they are trying to convince others to accept their frankly obnoxious, outdated beliefs.
How can we imitate Jesus when talking to others about sensitive subjects or about deeply entrenched false beliefs? In the following video, note how a young publisher imitated Jesus.
I always had good relationship with everyone in my class, and I always wanted to keep it that way. I wanted to be liked, I wanted to be accepted, I wanted to feel that people want to talk to me. All my classmates and teachers knew my stand on certain beliefs when it came to topics about neutrality or celebrations. But of course, with age, certain topics changed that I wasn't prepared for. And it made me a bit scared that I won't be liked anymore and that I'm going against the grain. A new girl joined our class. I was praying to Jehovah for a long time that I want a Bible study, and I thought that this could be my chance. One day we were talking, and she had started to tell me that she's actually interested in a girl, someone that she's wanted to date. And I totally froze. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I should say something. The bell rang, so I didn't say anything. But I knew that this topic will come up again. I felt so overwhelmed. How can I talk about something so sensitive, present it in a way that shows that Jehovah is loving and kind, but in the same way, talk about how I don't support it because it goes against my beliefs?
Poor Nicola. She is in this difficult situation where not only is she going to school not just to learn, but to recruit people into her faith, which is how it is when you're raised as a Jehovah's Witness. You're not just interested in learning. You need to exploit the fact that you have this group of individuals that ordinary members of the congregation don't have access to. You have a responsibility to try to bring them into the truth. And Nicola meets this new girl who, it seems, is either bisexual or lesbian, is attracted to her own gender. And it's interesting, she uses words like feeling scared and overwhelmed. She's scared because she's afraid that she won't be liked anymore once people learn how she really feels about subjects like homosexuality. And isn't it a shame that a girl in her position is going to school feeling overwhelmed, feeling anxious or fretful, because she feels this responsibility to persuade people on this. She can't simply approach this from the point of view of, maybe I should listen to what my friend has to say on this, because maybe it will help educate me on how I approach or how I feel about people who might be gay or bisexual. Maybe I can learn from talking to this person about how she feels. That's not the approach at all. The automatic approach is that Nicola has been raised with, is that irrespective of what this new girl might tell her, Nicola is right. She has the truth. And she just needs to figure out a way of persuading her friend that her sexuality is wrong.
So I prayed to Jehovah for him to give me wisdom. I made it a goal in my personal study, and I opened the Young People Ask book because it has a topic about homosexuality, and it had great examples about how to talk about it tactfully. And I wrote them down and thought, how could I formulate it in a way that I would say it naturally? So not too long after that, a girl from my class comes up to me and she's talking about this new couple in the school, and she mentioned that it's 2 girls. Only this time, I wasn't too shocked, and I was prepared. She said, "You're one of Jehovah's Witnesses, right? So you don't support homosexuality. You hate them, right?" And I calmly explained to her that she is right that we don't support homosexuality, but that does not mean that we hate the people. The Bible doesn't approve of smoking either, but most of my class smokes, and I never ignored them or disrespected them. And it's the same in this situation as well. I saw that she didn't agree with me 100%, but she wasn't upset, and she did listen to me, and I saw that she was thinking it over. And we continued to talk after that. I felt so relieved after that conversation, and I felt that Jehovah was so proud of me, that he was like right there with me, and it just reassured me that when other controversial topics will come up again, Jehovah will help me prepare and season my words with salt so that I could be tactful with the people and share my beliefs.
Wow. Would you like to be able to handle sensitive topics like Nicola did?
I'm not so sure, thanks, Dennis. I think I would rather be in a position where I can give other people the benefit of the doubt, quite frankly. And I'd love to, instead of Nicola, be in a position where I can accept people for who they are, rather than need books like the Young People Ask book to give me suggested things to say to people so that I might persuade them surreptitiously to start thinking the way I do, in the blinkered, bigoted, narrow-minded way that I used to think, which is to think that if you are gay or bisexual or transgender, there's something wrong with you. You are a sinful person, and you need to stop feeling the way you feel if you want to make it through Armageddon, which is how Jehovah's Witnesses feel. If you want to avoid destruction, yes, you might feel a certain way about people of your own gender, but you better not act on it, which is sexual repression. So a gay person, a person who has these feelings, has to go their entire lives basically in denial if they want to make it through Armageddon. That's what Nicola's beliefs are, or that's what she's being asked to believe in the Young People Ask book. And the Young People Ask book is giving her suggested ways of introducing these appalling ideas to her classmates. And she's pleased, not because she's managed to win over her classmate, clearly that didn't happen, but just because she's been able to navigate this situation in such a way that she's off the hook. She's not being seen as hateful and bigoted, even though her views are very much hateful and bigoted. And her get out, her way of dodging the issue was to say, oh, well, it's not that we hate gay people or people who are bisexual. It's just the actions that God hates. Well, I'm sorry, it's one and the same. Our sexuality is very much a part of us as individuals. So if you're going to write off someone's sexuality, if you're going to invalidate it and say you actually have no right to feel the way you feel, or the way you feel sexually about people of the same gender is, how did Dennis put it before, unnatural. The way you feel is unnatural and wrong and abhorrent, and you really should be feeling a different way. I think that is hating the individual. And I think it's semantics. It's semantics to say, oh, well, it's not you that we hate. It's just the actions that we hate. You're splitting hairs. You're dodging the issue. Young Jehovah's Witnesses are here being told to avoid being upfront about what they're supposed to believe and just say whatever they can to convince people that actually Jehovah's Witnesses are reasonable and cool and tolerant, and maybe, if possible, they can sow a few seeds that might lead to a conversation where they can gradually, over a long period of time, trick people into thinking that their beliefs are actually true.
Jehovah God and his dear son Jesus has set a beautiful example for each and every one of us in our dealing with women today. Because not everyone treats women the way they're supposed to be treated. And Jehovah is the one that sets the example, and his son follows that. You see, in this world that we're living in, according to what the Apostle Paul said in Ephesians chapter 4, he made this statement. He says, all of us should put away the old personality. The old personality means that you are number one in the house. You're some macho figure. We're not. You're not. As far as Jehovah is concerned, it says those sisters are the ones that Jehovah is asking us to take care of. Won't you please do that? And here's something else. When you think of those dear girls that are in our congregation, all of those sisters, can we train them to do different things? How about helping in the maintenance? And how about teaching them some machinery to repair certain things? I want you to consider this. At Ramapo, at this time, do you know all of those big machinery? 1/3 of the operators are sisters. Can they learn to do things like that? How about cutting grass at the Kingdom Hall? You, dear sisters, you can do that. Who cuts the grass at Warwick, where we're at? At Wallkill, at Pattison, at Fishkill. They're sisters that do that. And they can do that too. Please remember that.
Wow, mind blown. Apparently, women can do machinery. And we've just learned from John Wims, who's a Warwick Bethelite, we've just learned that women are capable of cutting grass. I mean, wow. You heard it here first, folks. You're welcome, I guess. But yeah, this is wisdom straight out of the Pure Worship Convention. Spiritual food at the proper time, I'm sure. So John Wims is taking us through the symposium item, Lessons from What Jesus Said, I Am He. He's basically basing his talk on the encounter between Jesus and the Samaritan woman. I've condensed it down to just a few clips. The whole talk is fascinating to listen to because poor John Wims, it's very, very clear that he has some very deeply entrenched misogynistic views, and yet his talk is kind of really desperately trying to give the opposite impression. He's trying to give the impression that Jehovah's Witnesses have this super progressive attitude when it comes to women. You heard him say there that there's this worldly mentality that the man needs to be a macho figure in the house, when in reality, it's not like that at all. And the women are to be treasured and valued. Well, he's alluding to verses in the Bible that literally say the head of every woman is the man. So he's being a bit disingenuous, really, in trying to represent differently the reality of what life is like for a woman in the Jehovah's Witness religion. If you are a woman in the Jehovah's Witness religion, men are your superiors. You're not allowed to teach in the congregation. You're not allowed anywhere near a platform unless it's to clean the darn thing or give a demonstration or an experience at the direction of a male speaker. How is that progressive? How is that honouring women? And to top it all off, he's giving this super condescending speech about how women should be taught machinery as though they're incapable of doing that, and how women should be cutting the grass more. And this is supposed to be wisdom from the faithful slave.
Now let's talk to us husbands. When we took that vow, we told our dear wives, their parents, and Jehovah God most of all, that we're going to respect and dignify them. Brothers, let's make sure that we live up to that. Respect them and dignify them. Is there any harm in washing the dishes? No. How about cooking sometime? Give them a break. You see, dear brothers and sisters, the point of it is copy the example of Jesus. What would Jesus want us to do to take care of them? And I was thinking of this part, and to mention relevant to this point of cooking. I like cooking. And when you think about preparing a meal for your family, how do you think your wife will feel? Maybe we didn't do too good the first time, but we will do better. How about washing the dishes after? How about cleaning the house, helping out, seeing what she has to go through?
Seeing what she has to go through. Thank you, John Wims. Again, just a fascinating talk, because he's doing everything he can to present Jehovah's Witnesses as being progressive when it comes to issues surrounding gender roles and the role of women in society, and particularly in the family. And all he's doing is reinforcing the gender roles. Give them a break, he says. Give them a break from their assigned roles of cooking and washing the dishes. So it doesn't hurt to just every now and then, as the mood takes you, you can do the dishes, can't you? You can do a bit of cooking, because we should be giving them a break, because essentially what he's arguing there is because that's the job of the wife. And he's trying to convince us in this talk that Jehovah's Witnesses have got it all figured out when it comes to treating women with dignity.
Now, it's true, we share good news because we want individuals to hear it. And that's why we're ready to seize any opportunity. We're ready to start conversations, whether it's at work or school or anywhere else. But the fact remains that good news is good, not just for the one hearing it, but also for the one sharing it. And that's true regardless of the response. Reminds me of a conversation that I had with a very good friend of mine. His name was Eddie. He serves as a missionary. And some years ago, he was given a new assignment to a very difficult territory. It had been unresponsive for years, and Eddie knew it. And I remember asking him how he felt about this new assignment. And he told me, frankly, he wasn't very excited about it. But he was ready to obey. He knew it was the right thing to do. Eddie spent nearly a decade preaching in that territory. And do you know how many people he helped to reach to dedication and baptism? None. But when he left that assignment, Eddie was in tears. And I remember being shocked. I was amazed. What changed? Why was he suddenly so sad? He explained to me that after preaching there for years, he had developed a genuine love for the people of that territory. You see, preaching good news was good for him. It helped nourish a quality that he needed to work on at that time. And it could do the same for us. Think about it. Declaring our hope, it nourishes our faith, regardless of the response. Preaching informally, it strengthens our courage. Returning to not at homes can refine our patience and perseverance, and the list goes on. The point is, preaching good news is good for us.
This was interesting. So we've just been hearing from Albert Isa, who is a Warwick Bethelite. He's giving the symposium item, Lessons from What Jesus Said, My Food. And what Albert has essentially admitted to here is that when it comes to the preaching work, it's not necessarily about the results. It's not necessarily about going, therefore, and making disciples of people of all the nations, making sure you're giving people an opportunity to survive Armageddon and make it through the new system, make it through into paradise. It's not about that necessarily. It's really just about the process. It's really about just being immersed in this lifestyle where you get to repeat your beliefs to yourself over and over again to total strangers in hopes that one of them might react. And he gives this example of Eddie as though this is something that Jehovah's Witnesses should aspire to. Eddie preaches in a particular territory for nearly a decade and isn't able to persuade a single person to get baptized as a Jehovah's Witness. Actually, Eddie and I have something in common because I pioneered for nearly a decade. I think it was 9 years in total that I pioneered for. And I too wasn't able to persuade a single person to become a Jehovah's Witness. I never brought someone from the door-to-door preaching work through to baptism. And I'm very proud of that, by the way. But I don't think it's because I was terrible at preaching. I think I was actually quite good on the door. I think I was able to give a reasonably energetic, charismatic representation of my beliefs. But the problem I encountered, or the problem that I was up against, was that my beliefs were nonsense. I would call on someone and maybe get invited in, and we would have a really good discussion, and I would get out the knowledge book or the Bible teach book or whatever we happened to be studying, and we'd make some progress through the book, and I'd say, okay, I'm going to come next week and we're going to continue on with these paragraphs because I think we can learn something here. And then I'd call back a week later and it would be just completely different body language. They were just not interested whatsoever and trying to get rid of me as quickly as possible. And I'm kind of going away scratching my head thinking, what's changed here? They seem to be really super interested in this, and now it's like they're a completely different person. Well, obviously, it's because they've gone away and done some research into Jehovah's Witnesses. If someone calls at your home and they give you an offer that seems a little bit too good to be true, could be some insurance policy, could be some crypto scheme, who knows? But once they've left, that's your opportunity to jump on Google and see what Google has to say. And that's when Jehovah's Witnesses come completely undone, because the minute you go on the internet, the minute you stray from the confines of jw.org, that's when the beliefs are absolutely torn to pieces by the logic, this just simple logic. And so what Albert here is basically admitting is that the preaching work doesn't really work that well. It might work now and then. It might work if you encounter someone who is emotionally vulnerable. They don't have such good critical thinking skills. They're not perhaps so proactive when it comes to fact-checking things. And yes, in that sort of perfect storm, you can bring someone to baptism. But Albert knows that the vast majority of his audience have never brought someone to baptism. And he's reassuring them by saying, look, it's not so much about whether you get someone baptized or not. It's just the process. It's just the fact that you are affirming your belief by talking about it all the time. And I found that really interesting because it's essentially confessing that the preaching work isn't really about making disciples. It's just about keeping Jehovah's Witnesses busy, keeping them on this hamster wheel of activity and of constantly reaffirming their beliefs to themselves.
How should we worship God? By simply accepting what's been passed down to us through generations or through families or what's popular in our community? Is that what we want to do? Would that be using our power of reason? No, it wouldn't. In fact, history has shown us that true discoveries are made when a person decides not to simply accept the current belief of his day, but rather digs for the truth himself, digs for the truth. For example, astronomer Nicholas Copernicus used his power of reason to prove that the earth revolves around the sun and not the other way around. He came to that correct conclusion when it went against popular belief back then. Well, so too, we need to use our power of reason to really think about how we serve God. But what if in the process we discover that some of the things we believe are not rooted in truth, but are merely mirages?
Am I the only one who's just fuming at the irony here? So this is Mark Newmair, governing body helper. He is giving the talk, Do You Worship What You Know? And he's making the argument that too many people have strongly held beliefs based purely on their culture or their family, their close relatives, how they grew up, what their background is. And their background informs their beliefs. Too many people are indoctrinated, you could say, by their parents to believe something, irrespective of whether it's actually true or not. I mean, how is he not seeing the irony? And you could be watching this thinking, Well, that completely goes against what we've heard, even in this convention and in multiple examples from JW Broadcasting and other videos, where they are all about parents indoctrinating their children and making sure children are raised to believe the Jehovah's Witness religion from as early as possible, irrespective of whether they understand it or not, irrespective of whether they understand 1914 and 607 and all of that stuff. They just need to have the beliefs, and then the reasoning will follow later on. That's how Jehovah's Witnesses are raised. And here you're getting Mark Neumayer making the exact opposite argument, that that's not how it should work, that you should reach your beliefs based on the facts, just like Copernicus did with heliocentricity. I mean, how dare he, quite frankly, start citing science and the scientific method? This is a religion that refutes science where it disagrees with their preconceived ideas. This is a religion that says that evolution is a false teaching. And yet they have the gall to start name-dropping scientists and praising the scientific method. And if by this point you're completely flummoxed as to how he could just so overtly speak out of both sides of his mouth, or deliver such ironic, dare I say, hypocritical rhetoric regarding religion, it's all because he's giving the public discourse at the convention. So this is the talk that's intended not for a Jehovah's Witness audience, but for those invited to the convention by Jehovah's Witnesses who aren't believers yet. That's why he's talking the way he's talking. He is speaking to a completely different audience who weren't raised as Jehovah's Witnesses, in hopes that by completely misrepresenting the way Jehovah's Witnesses indoctrinate their children, by completely ignoring all of that and presenting Jehovah's Witnesses as fastidious when it comes to pursuing truth and facts, regardless of what previous generations believed, he's hoping that he can trick people in the audience who've never been raised as Jehovah's Witnesses to thinking, here is a reasonable, facts-based, logic-based religious belief system.
Why do you believe what you believe? In many cases, it may be a matter of what your parents taught you, or simply of where or when you were born. So if you had grown up in another place, or a different time, you may have developed a very different set of beliefs. But does the truth about God really depend on when or where we live? Does it seem logical that multiple conflicting beliefs about God could all be true? Is it possible that the truth is something different from what you were taught? Just because someone claims to represent God does not mean that his claim is true.
Just because somebody claims to represent God does not mean his claim is true. Is that not exactly what we can say about the governing body? They claim to be God's channel with mankind, God's approved channel for dispensing spiritual food at the proper time. That is their claim. And yet apparently that claim should not be challenged. Their claim to being used by God as his essentially messengers, that claim should be just left untouched. But we should scrutinize the claims made by other religions. So again, it's really infuriating that the makers of this video are repeating what we've just seen in Mark Neumeyer's talk. Mark Neumeyer introduces this video, by the way. They're repeating the same trick of making it sound like Jehovah's Witnesses are all about facts and logic and drilling down and getting to the truth, irrespective of how people were raised, while ignoring the fact that Jehovah's Witnesses are very blatant when it comes to the need to indoctrinate children as young as possible. So that if you are raised in a Jehovah's Witness family, it's not like they say, oh, well, this is what we believe, but when you're 18, you'll get to decide for yourself. You know, when you're older, you just explore all the different options and use the scientific method, you know, use critical thinking skills to make your own decision as to what you believe. They don't give children that luxury. So how dare they point the finger at all the other religions? And they do make one very interesting observation, that all religions cannot all be true.
Does it seem logical that multiple conflicting beliefs about God could all be true?
Well, I agree with them there. Self-evidently, not all religions can be true. But where they're going with this, of course, is that there is just one religion that's true. And miraculously, Jehovah's Witnesses are the ones that have found it. Isn't it more likely that rather than all religions being true, that perhaps all religions aren't true? All religions are man-made constructs designed to control people.
The God of the Bible once told one of his worshippers, "The prophets are prophesying lies in my name. I have not sent them." For centuries, people misrepresented what the Bible says about God and used religious teachings in an effort to control people and to make money. With good reason, then, the Bible says, "Prove to yourselves the good and acceptable and perfect will of God." If you are searching for the truth about God, why not examine what the Bible says for yourself? Doing so does not mean abandoning your culture. Millions of people from all over the world and from different backgrounds and cultures have discovered that the Bible contains the truth about God. They have found a sense of purpose in worshiping God in a way that they know pleases Him. To learn more about what the Bible says on this and many other topics, go to jw.org.
Well, that video, it helped us to see the need to reason things out, not to be content to just take things at face value. That's the easy way. But using our power of reason, exercising thinking ability is hard work, but it's worth it.
It is worth it. And unfortunately, Mark Newmayer, when we do exercise our thinking ability, when we do apply logic and reason to the beliefs of Jehovah's Witnesses, they completely fall apart. They are nonsensical. It's just completely illogical, the theology of Jehovah's Witnesses. So they've produced this video with the title, "Why Do You Believe What You Believe?" Mark Newmayer is presenting it as part of his public discourse in hopes of persuading members of the audience who aren't yet Jehovah's Witnesses that they should join. He's trying to suggest that Jehovah's Witnesses are all about logic and reason. All other religions, it seems, were created as an effort to control people and get money out of people. But Jehovah's Witnesses are different. They are the one and only exception. And you'll find out all about that if you study with them. The video, by the way, I mean, I guess make of it what you will. We will all have our own opinion on whether it presents Jehovah's Witnesses in a persuasive or compelling way. For me, the video has very, very strong culty undertones. It's like red flags everywhere. Say you're a cult without saying you're a cult.
Well, let's begin. The basic first step: accept that truth does exist. Why do we say that? So many people today question whether truth exists. But we need to remember that there are fundamental truths that cannot be altered by personal opinion. Well, what do we mean by this? Well, let's go back to our previous example about the earth revolving around the sun. Regardless of what other people think or say, it doesn't matter what they say, because the fundamental truth is it exists at the very core of reality, the earth moving around the sun. Well, in a similar way, there are fundamental truths regarding God and worship too. God does exist. The star formation, the power of the sun, diversity of life, photosynthesis, a single cell, DNA. Now, if we take the time to contemplate the complexity and intricacy of design found in nature, the logical conclusion is that there must be an intelligent mind behind all of this. Our power of reason leads us to such a conclusion. For example, a professor of philosophy, Anthony Flew, was at one time a leading advocate of atheism for some 50 years. However, after a study of DNA and the staggering complexity of life, Flew changed his opinion. Citing an ancient approach to reasoning, he wrote, "We must follow the argument wherever it leads." For Professor Flew, the evidence pointed to the existence of a creator.
Wow. Okay. So now what's happening is Mark Neumayer is cherry-picking an example of somebody who switched from atheism to a belief in God. I'm going to go into that in a bit more detail later because it's way more complex than Mark Neumayer would have you believe. But quite frankly, how dare Mark Neumayer present Jehovah's Witnesses as being all about science and all about the scientific method and accepting truth and reality, accepting the evidence wherever it leads. That is absolutely not what being a Jehovah's Witness is about. Being a Jehovah's Witness is about surrendering your critical thinking skills, surrendering your personal autonomy, and just allowing a leadership in upstate New York, in America, to dictate for you what your opinions are and what your beliefs are. That's not following the evidence wherever it leads. That's just yielding to an authority. But it's incredibly disingenuous of Mark Neumayer to again cherry-pick this name of this philosopher, of this academic. You know, a sample size of one, apparently, is enough for Mark Neumayer. He's not going to acknowledge the plethora of other atheists, or the plethora of other philosophers, I should say, who are persuaded towards atheism. He just wants a cute story that's going to prop up his argument. And let's just remember, Anthony Flew was a philosopher. And Jehovah's Witnesses are very much against what they call human philosophy, or the philosophies and empty deceptions of men. In fact, just this month, when they backtracked against their position on higher education and said that it was now okay for Jehovah's Witnesses to pursue higher education, they specifically cited philosophy as one of the things that Jehovah's Witnesses should still be wary of.
Another important safeguard is to protect your thinking abilities. Some courses might expose you to philosophy and empty deception, including atheism and evolution.
So this is an organization that is very much against philosophy and people becoming philosophers, and yet when it's convenient for them, they'll cite the name of a dead philosopher because he once had a change of heart that could be roughly considered to be broadly in line with what their beliefs are. When you actually look at Antony Flew, because you do hear this name repeatedly cited by apologists for Christianity, it's interesting when you go on the Wikipedia page. So Flew died in 2010, and he changed his position from atheism in 2004. It says on Wikipedia, however, in 2004, he changed his position and stated that he now believed in the existence of an intelligent designer of the universe, shocking colleagues and fellow atheists. In order to further clarify his personal conception of God, Flew openly made an allegiance to deism, more specifically a belief in the Aristotelian God, a divine watchmaker removed from human affairs but responsible for the intricate workings of the universe, and dismissed on many occasions a hypothetical conversion to Christianity, Islam, or any other religion. So let's go where the evidence takes us, shall we, Mark Newmare? Since you've name-dropped this guy who apparently supports your position, and since his opinion is apparently an opinion that we should be factoring in, what do we make of this? The fact that he renounced religion, he renounced Christianity, Islam, or any other religion, and his personal belief was actually relatively close to mine. I mean, I'm on the fence at this current time as to whether I believe in atheism or some form of deism. I'm open, through my own spiritual journey, I'm open to there being some kind of higher power, but that doesn't get you to Jehovah God, Bible, Jesus, governing body, faithful slave. It gets you nowhere close. And Antony Flew apparently went to great pains to clarify that he was not supportive of Christianity, which is what Mark Newmare is suggesting was his position. That is super shady, ladies and gentlemen. That is very, very disingenuous for Mark Newmare to cherry-pick this name but then misrepresent. I mean, he's dead now, so he can't speak otherwise, can he? But to cherry-pick this name and to suggest that the dead guy behind it was in any way supportive of the Jehovah's Witness theology is just downright deceptive, disingenuous, and manipulative.
What you are experiencing here is not a mirage. It's real. We are real people wanting to help you. It's real. This convention is pure worship. Pure worship at its best is right here with Jehovah's Witnesses. You won't find it anywhere else on the planet. Free from contamination, unadulterated, morally untainted. It's pure worship. And that's why we love you being here. Now, don't look for perfection. We're not perfect, but we're trying. Don't look for perfection. Look for pure worship. Look for individuals that are showing love and peace and kindness and mildness. They're being directed by Jehovah God's Holy Spirit. They have godly qualities. This is what we're talking about. Stay with us. Keep studying with us. We'll explain Bible prophecy to you. We'll help you to see why we are living deep into the last days, what the future holds. You found the truth. This is it. Pure worship. What does the world have to offer? We're on the top of the mountain where Jehovah has built this massive organization with millions of people globally. You found it. What's at the bottom of the mountain? Nothing but tables of vomit. And yet, up top, we are sucking in the beautiful, clean, fresh air of pure worship. And that's why we love you being with us today.
So there you have it, folks. Tables of vomit is all you can look forward to if you don't embrace Jehovah's Witness ideology. Because Jehovah's Witnesses are the ones with the truth. They're the ones with the pure worship, the pure, unadulterated worship. Although there's an interesting caveat there. Don't look for perfection. It's not perfect, but it's pure. Aren't those two words kind of synonymous? I mean, if it's not perfect, then how can it be pure? How can it be unadulterated? So, yeah, this is Mark Numer really going on the hard sell. Again, if you're wondering why Mark Numer is throwing so much energy into this talk when he's really speaking to a room full of Jehovah's Witnesses, it's because this is the public discourse that outsiders are invited to. And he's really, again, pushing the Jehovah's Witness religion, just like any kind of shady used car salesman. He's suggesting that there's nowhere else to go. Everything that you need is here. No one else has it quite like we do. No one else has the pure, unadulterated truth. And yet in the same talk, we've heard him give the audience exactly the logic that they need to unpick the Jehovah's Witness ideology. And that is to fact check, to use critical thinking skills. Don't accept something as true just because you're being told it's true. Don't accept the claims of religious leaders just on face value. Look at the history, look at the scandals, look at the examples of flip-flops, of them clearly being a man-made entity that is intent on controlling people. Look at all of that evidence and take that into consideration, and you will inevitably reach the conclusion that Jehovah's Witnesses are a scam. But Mark Numer is just hoping. I mean, he's entitled to hope, I guess. But I would suggest that realistically, much of what he said here in his pitch will be falling on deaf ears.
Let me mention a reminder. We appreciate having the gospel accounts depicted for us on screen. The brothers and sisters appearing in our videos are very much like you, loyal Christians carrying out an assignment from the congregation. You may recognize some of them, or you may meet them in the future. How will you treat them? Unlike many unbelievers, our brothers and sisters don't want prominence. They'd prefer for you to focus on the scriptural truths being taught, not on them. Paul's words found at 2 Corinthians 5:16 remind us that we know no man from a fleshly viewpoint. That is, we don't judge our brothers and sisters based on what they look like or which assignments of service they've received. And as we were reminded in the 2024 Governing Body Update number 8, neither would we want to admire personalities for our own benefit. So rather than asking for a selfie with a participant in one of our videos, please let the person be. This shows that you respect both your brother or sister and the spiritual food that Jehovah is providing.
Thank you, David Splain, for reminding us of that. So David Splain there in the penultimate talk, what did you learn? This is like a summary of all 3 days of the convention. He's taking us on a whistle-stop tour of all of the main talking points. And I found this the most interesting part of his talk because he is repeating, as he said there, what was said in Governing Body Update number 4 for 2024 by Kenneth Cook, if memory serves. Kenneth Cook was telling Jehovah's Witnesses not to idolize or give any attention to other Jehovah's Witnesses who might be involved in making videos for the organization. And you can see where that's a huge issue, or becoming more of an issue now, that we have an actual Jesus.
Jesus.
I mean, they literally have a dude portraying Jesus in a live action series. Imagine what it's going to be like for that guy. I mean, I don't know his name, but imagine you're him and you show up at one of these conventions or assemblies, or even just to your local meeting. Imagine how people are going to be looking at him. He's portrayed Jesus, you know? Quite a big character, quite a big role. And it's only natural, particularly in the modern day and age, that some Jehovah's Witnesses might want to get a selfie with him. It's kind of normal, isn't it? But David Splain and the others on the governing body are terrified of individuals who are not basically governing body members getting the attention that should be due to them. So he's pulling out these verses about knowing no man from a fleshly viewpoint, just kind of clutching at any straws, any Bible verses he can use that might say, oh, don't obsess over an individual, while completely ignoring the elephant in the room, which is that Jehovah's Witnesses, all 9 million of them, are very much encouraged to idolize and to adore the individuals who comprise the governing body members and attach great significance to their privilege of service. So apparently it's one rule for Jehovah's Witnesses who are assigned to appear in these dramas and in these video productions, and another rule entirely for God's faithful and discreet slave.
Jehovah set in place an arrangement in ancient times that people could actually be involved with. It was interactive, but this was showing us what eventually would be the great spiritual temple. But still, there may be many thoughts that come to your mind. For example, but why did Jehovah ask them to offer animals? Like those animals really couldn't cover the sins. Well, perhaps we could use a modern-day illustration. Most of us here have credit cards. Oh, now straight away that causes a problem. We feel pain. Just imagine that you have maxed out all your credit cards. And you might be saying, I don't have to imagine, I have. Well, it's a very difficult situation to be in, isn't it? You see, that's what mankind generally is like. We've had it explained in our program that sin was inherited, and that as far as a debt goes, it's very similar to sin. So our debt before Jehovah is huge. It's just as if our credit card is maxed out. But now, with a credit card, what does the bank expect of you? They want that minimum payment, don't they? That way they know you're still alive. You're still active. Now, that minimum payment's not going to pay off the whole debt, is it? But it just is a matter of you showing that you're still there, active, and trying to do something.
We've just been listening to governing body member Jeffrey Jackson taking us through the final talk of the 2025 Pure Worship Convention of Jehovah's Witnesses. His theme, Remain in Jehovah's Great Spiritual Temple. And at this particular point in the talk, he's talking about why the Jews, why the Israelites had this system of animal sacrifice. What was the point of it? He's explaining that we're all in debt, much the same as someone who has maxed out their credit card, and that got a few chuckles. I can well imagine there are many Jehovah's Witnesses who are in debt because they've not had the luxury, as is the case now, of having the choice to be able to go through higher education and aspire to better jobs. So yes, I can definitely relate to being in debt as a result of Jehovah's Witness beliefs, and that's why he got so many laughs. But he's likening being in debt to inherited sin. That's what his illustration is about. And he's saying the animal sacrifices were like the minimum payment that you might pay on a credit card. It doesn't cover the full amount, but it just establishes that you're still around and you still have some interest in showing that you can pay back the full amount at some point. So the animal sacrifices were kind of like a token display of acknowledging just how sinful humans are. That's essentially Jeffrey Jackson's argument. And at this point in the talk, I couldn't help but feel enraged for what I guess is quite a personal reason. It's not something that most of you will have an issue with. But I can remember being on the Theocratic Ministry School, which no longer exists. Well, it sort of exists, but it's not anywhere near as regimented and codified as it used to be. But when I was being raised as a Jehovah's Witness, we had this thing called the Theocratic Ministry School, which was all about training young men in the art of public speaking. And if there's any kind of transferable skill that Jehovah's Witnesses have given me, aside from the ability to knock on the doors of total strangers and try to sell them something, if there's any skill that I've gotten from my Jehovah's Witness background, it's public speaking. Some might say I have a flair for it, but honestly, whether this flair, whether this skill is part of me or part of my background, I don't know. But definitely the Theocratic Ministry School honed me in my ability to try to communicate with large audiences. Undeniably. You could say I've switched it around on them. I've used the very skill that they gave me against the organization through doing my YouTube channel. But I remember one talk in particular. I can't remember how old I was. I was definitely a minor. I was definitely a teenager, or perhaps even younger than a teenager. I don't know. But I gave a talk where I made the argument that inherited sin is much like being in debt. I don't remember whether I specifically said credit card. Maybe I did, but it was definitely along the lines of being in debt, having some kind of loan, or maxing out your credit card in some way. And I can remember the Theocratic Ministry School instructor, the elder whose job it was to give feedback. I can remember him telling me that the illustration was bad because some people are sensitive when it comes to debt. Some people might have issues with their money, and it's quite triggering, essentially was his argument. It's quite triggering for people to have sin likened to such a crude thing as being in debt to a bank or a credit card company. And that was like the negative counsel that I received when I used this exact same illustration that many, many years later a governing body member is now using. So as soon as I heard this illustration from Jeffrey Jackson, I couldn't help but chuckle. But I suppose if I'm going to kind of more broadly critique his illustration, trying to put aside my personal grievances from my childhood, I would ask, what does this say about God? What does this say about the God of the Bible if he is like a credit card company? If that's his approach to humanity? All those years, all those centuries when it was animal sacrifice, before Jesus gave his human sacrifice, because apparently human sacrifice is something that's laudable. But before Jesus, all those years when there was all that bloodshed and all of those animals being slaughtered to appease this deity, that was all just some kind of token gesture. It wasn't actually serving any meaningful purpose in actually paying off human sin. It was literally just a token gesture so that humans could tell God, we're sinful. You've got us. We're sinful. We acknowledge it. It was a minimum payment. What does it say about a God who needs blood to flow from animals in order to be satisfied that humans are accepting of how sinful they are?
So in ancient Israel, Jehovah realized that the blood of sheep and goats and bulls were not satisfactory with regard to paying off this huge debt of sin. But it was like a minimum payment, something that the Israelites needed to do, first of all, to show their willingness and their acknowledgement of the sin, but also helping them to see that there was no way out of it because they couldn't, under that arrangement, pay off this huge debt. Hopefully that makes it a little easier for us to understand. So thinking about that, we see that Jehovah's arrangement is an arrangement where he makes it easy for us to worship him. Now, as we said, this arrangement is not based on the blood of animals, but on the precious blood of Jesus Christ, the ransom that was paid for us. It's just as if that huge debt, the balance of our credit card, has been paid off. So what a beautiful arrangement for mankind, even though we're all sinful, to be able to offer pure worship to Jehovah.
Again, I don't think it's a beautiful arrangement. I think it's quite a messed up arrangement. If mankind are sinful, then whose fault is it? Is it my fault that Adam and Eve ate the fruit? I don't remember being around and having any say in that. And again, for centuries, the solution seemed to be, well, let's kill a lot of animals. That's going to help with the down payment of this inherited sin. That will at least show God that humans acknowledge that they've done something wrong. And then ultimately, that was all leading to a more perfect arrangement where there could be this human sacrifice. Again, any religion that relies on human sacrifice, I would immediately have an issue with. And yet, for some reason, when it's Christianity, we're fine with it. You know, we look down on ancient religions, maybe in South America, you know, the Mayans, who were kind of pulling people's hearts out, and we think, oh, that's grotesque, that's barbaric. Well, how is it any different to say, well, as long as one man gets tortured and, you know, scourged and has nails driven through his limbs and then is suspended on a piece of wood or two pieces of wood, makes no difference really to me. He's suspended on a piece of wood with his body, the weight of his body pulling on bits of metal. That ought to do it. That ought to erase centuries or millennia of human sin, and that ought to make it so that humans don't need to suffer anymore and don't need to die anymore. Only all of that supposedly happened 2,000 years ago, and here we are, as I said in a recent video where I was talking about my views on Christianity, here we are 2,000 years later, and if you look at how much suffering and misery there is on the planet, it's almost as though that ultimate sacrifice, that human sacrifice of Jesus, had no actual tangible results at all in making anything better. Because here we are, still on a planet with ordinary sinful people who do messed up things, doing messed up things to each other, with no sign whatsoever that anything is going to get better anytime quickly.
Now, who today can we say are trying to worship Jehovah with spirit and truth in this great spiritual temple? We're not being presumptuous by saying Jehovah's Witnesses are trying to do that. And what a privilege we have to be with our brothers and sisters in this great spiritual temple arrangement. And there are three very important things that we'd like you to take note of. So if you're taking notes or on a device, if you can just put a little note there, these three things are very important. The first one is we need to uphold Jehovah's standards. We need to uphold Jehovah's standards. The standards of the world are plummeting, aren't they? In fact, sometimes you wonder if there's any standards in the world today, because it seems everything is accepted.
Everything is accepted, is it, Jeffrey Jackson? The world accepts everything. Does the world accept covering up child abuse? That would be my question. I don't think secular authorities on the whole do encourage or accept the covering up on an industrial scale of child sexual abuse. And yet that's a standard that Jehovah's Witnesses very much do have. Which brings me to what Jeffrey Jackson said about presumptuousness. If you are feeling this sense of deja vu when Jeffrey Jackson was saying we're not being presumptuous in saying that Jehovah's Witnesses are the ones trying to worship God with spirit and truth, perhaps this is why.
Do you see yourselves as modern-day disciples, the modern-day equivalent of Jesus' disciples?
We certainly hope to follow Jesus and be his disciples.
And do you see yourselves as Jehovah God's spokespeople on earth?
That, I think, would seem to be quite presumptuous to say that we are the only spokesperson that God is using. The scriptures clearly show that someone can act in harmony with God's Spirit in giving comfort and help in the congregations.
So Jeffrey Jackson gave testimony to the Australian Royal Commission in 2015, where he said that it would be presumptuous, or it would seem to be quite presumptuous, to say that we are the only spokesperson that God is using. Those were his actual words. Now, in fairness, what he proceeded to say is, in that respect, we view ourselves as trying to fulfill that role, trying to fulfill the role of the faithful slave. And what's interesting is when he makes these comments now in 2025, he uses that word again, trying.
We're not being presumptuous by saying Jehovah's Witnesses are trying to do that.
We're not being presumptuous in saying that we are the ones trying to worship God in spirit and truth. So, although there may seem to be a contradiction, or like some backpedaling going on here, like Jeffrey Jackson trying to refute or contradict what he said under pressure when he was giving testimony at the Australian Royal Commission, actually what he's saying is the same. It's just this word trying that is key here. And my question would be, what difference does that make? You know, what difference does trying make? Surely everybody who claims to be religious is trying to worship God, trying to worship God with spirit and truth, or in spirit and in truth. But as Yoda said in Star Wars, do or do not, there is no try. In other words, you're either doing it or you're not. Trying is, quite frankly, irrelevant. And as Jeffrey Jackson goes on in this final talk, what's interesting is there are even further indications that even he himself has at least some reservations when it comes to the extent to which Jehovah's Witnesses are ticking all the boxes when it comes to pure worship.
But let's use a couple of illustrations. First of all, just imagine, and probably we can't imagine this, but you buy some pure gold, 24 carats. But then you find out it's only 99.999% pure gold. It's not really 100% pure gold. So if you take that back and say, I want my money back, I want to sue, this is false advertising, the person would say, it's nearly impossible these days to make 100% pure gold. Be reasonable. This is what's accepted. You see, it's not 100%, but we still call it pure gold. The same is true with regard to silver. Another illustration, perhaps that's more relatable. You send your clothes to the dry cleaning, and they come back, and you see they look clean. But now you get out that magnifying glass and you're looking into the molecular structure of this. Then you go back to the dry cleaners and you say, I want my money back. There was just some dirt still left there. What would they say? Be reasonable. That's not reasonable. Would we expect Jehovah to be less reasonable in what he expects? Of course not. So Jehovah expects us to do what we can do, and in that way, he accepts our worship as pure. He takes into consideration our motivations, what we want to do.
It's all about motivations, apparently. Who knew? Just do what you can do. Have good motives. Try to worship God with spirit and truth. Just one small problem. That's what everybody who is religious, more or less, is trying to do, or claiming that they're doing. Doing their best. Trying their best. For me, what we're seeing in Jeffrey Jackson's concluding talk of the 2025 Pure Worship Convention, again, his theme, Remain in Jehovah's Great Spiritual Temple. For me, what he's doing here is managing expectations. He knows that there are profound underlying problems with the theology that he is advocating, and that he and his colleagues are pushing even on children, so that entire lives get devoted to serving an organization based on specific theological teachings that are changing all the time, to the extent where only just a few days ago they did a U-turn on higher education. Now Jehovah's Witnesses have permission to partake, to better themselves in that way, whereas generations, including myself, were denied that. And now we're learning, oh, well, do you really expect perfection? That's his whole tone now. What a total charlatan. What a huckster. What a scam artist this man is. Do you really expect perfection? It's like expecting 100% gold. You're never going to get 100% gold. You can only ever strive for 99.999%. Be reasonable about this. This is who we're dealing with. This is the slime ball. This is Jeffrey Jackson. You are being unreasonable, apparently, if you look at Jehovah's Witnesses, an organization that calls itself the truth, not we're trying to be the truth, not maybe the truth, not almost the truth, but the truth. He's talking to people who call themselves that and telling them, well, as long as we're trying, as long as we're doing our best, that's all that matters.
Serving side by side with my brothers, there's no better way to live. I will bear your name oh so proudly. I'll give all that I can give. To do your will is my delight. I give you all my strength and might. This joy I feel, this joy is real. I will walk on in your light.
So we've just been watching part of the concluding music video for the 2025 Pure Worship Convention. I've just shown you not even a minute of this concluding song because, as you can see, it's kind of cringy, if not triggering, nauseating, etc. But this part I found very interesting in the context of what we've heard on this day of the convention from Mark Numer when he was giving his public discourse.
How should we worship God? By simply accepting what's been passed down to us through generations or through families or what's popular in our community.
And he was speaking out against those who believe a set of religious claims based on their upbringing, based on their background, based on their culture, based on their family. Those are bad reasons, apparently, to be in a religion. What you want to do is exercise critical thinking skills, is apply logic and reason, and that's going to help you to arrive at the real truth. Don't just believe in something because your parents want you to believe it, and yet look what they're showing in the final music video. They are showing exactly the opposite. They are showing young minds being indoctrinated so that they end up becoming Jehovah's Witnesses. You know, I can fully relate to the imagery of the young lad needing a little step so that he can stand at the platform. He's not big enough to physically stand next to a lectern, and yet there he is reading out to a Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses filled with many, including women, who will never get that privilege because they're looked down on just because they're women. They're not allowed to do that. And a child is allowed to instruct them and train them, or at least read from the Bible. It really, really infuriates me because I was that kid. I was that child. I started giving talks from as young as 4 or 5 years old. And of course, it's going to have an effect on your life and on your views, and it's going to give you a bias that is incredibly hard to shake off, especially when it becomes an existential issue, especially after you get baptized. And you realize that if you do ever change your mind, if you do ever apply logic and reason and critical thinking, and your beliefs start to fragment, start to collapse, there is a penalty attached. It's not just a case of the religion saying you're worthy of death in the future. It's a case of you are worthy of social death now, in the here and now. So we are going to make it so that your own family won't want to speak to you anymore. That's the real evil of child indoctrination, and it's celebrated in the final music video of this year's 2025 Pure Worship Convention. Anyway, those were my thoughts on the Sunday of this year's convention. I hope you found my opinions somewhat useful or relevant. Don't forget that if you enjoy this content, what you can do is subscribe to the channel for more such videos. I do also need to sincerely and profoundly thank those of you who are supporting this channel either as patrons or YouTube channel members. You are helping me to make this my job, so that every year when there's a convention, it's literally my job to sit through hours of this stuff and sift out the relevant talking points, and to do the same thing with JW Broadcasting videos and other material that Jehovah's Witnesses are expected to just absorb without any question, without any critical thinking. Those of you who are supporting my work financially are helping me to make this information available as a resource, so that when the time comes that a Jehovah's Witness is ready to start questioning their beliefs, the information is there at their disposal. So I really want to thank those of you, the hundreds of you who are helping in that way. If you're not able to contribute, of course I understand it. It makes total sense that many of you will not be in a position to pledge monthly. We were brought up in an organization that denied us higher education, even though they've now done a U-turn on that. We feel it, don't we? Many in my generation, at least, have been very, very limited in our employment and financial opportunities. So I never begrudge those of you who, for whatever reason, just don't have the circumstances to help. But I do need to thank those of you who are pledging. And if you want to know how you can join them, there will be some links below. But that's all I have to share with you. All that remains is to say thank you so much for watching.